big ones, your banks, your mining companies, your big retailers, your insurance companies, they all bid for tenders. Don't be mistaken thinking tenders are only for tenderpreneurs. Tenders are massive in the country. So any big business that you know of, they have some kind of business that they're doing with government. Government is the big buyer in the country. So if you're not doing business with the big buyer, then you're not in the game. Make sure that you complete them the way it's required, because if you submit a quotation, you might have the lowest price and the lowest BE rating, but the way you completed your SBD forms can disqualify you. So just make sure that you know how to complete the SBD forms. If you don't know how, watch this lesson towards the end. We'll show you how you complete those SBD forms. It's not a rocket science. They are simple, but make sure that you know what to complete where. Good day. Welcome to another lesson from our new venture creation series. Today we'll be looking at the unit standard called Tender to Secure Business. The unit standard is at NQF level 4 and it has 5 credits. The purpose of this unit standard is for those businesses that do business with government or large corporates, which normally advertise business opportunities using tenders or request proposal using the tender system. Basically, the lesson will go through how you get information about tenders, how the tender system work, how to negotiate prices with your suppliers so that you'll be able to bid competitively. Because if you don't negotiate your prices, you might not be competitive in a tender system. The first specific outcome that we're going to look at now is how to identify tender information or tender opportunities. So we'll start with identifying the tender opportunities and we go into how the tender system work, what is RF, request for proposal, what is a tender, and then we're going to discuss the difference between the two, and then where you can source the information about tenders, and then as well as how you bid for tenders. And later on, we'll take you through the example of how to complete tender documents. We'll go through step by step. We're looking at about 4 common forms that are used in a tender process, and we'll show you how you complete those forms. And also, this tendering business or this tendering business model fits into AEY, which is one of our case studies because they mainly focus on tendering for defense contracts. The question is, what is a tender? A tender is a system that is used by government and large corporates to invite suppliers or vendors to bid for projects or to supply goods and services. So the intention of the tender system is to give people equal opportunity to bid for projects or to supply goods and services. So it's for competitive bidding. So it gives everyone an opportunity to bid for certain goods and services that an organization wants to procure. That's what, to give everyone an opportunity. And the other side is because it's competitive bidding. The intention of the tenders is for the government or the large corporates to secure the lowest price for the goods and services that they are looking for. Even though we know in our tendering system or in our government system, ultimately government pays prices which are far above the market price, which defeat the purpose of the tendering system. The tendering system was meant for government to procure goods and services at competitive pricing. But because of, inefficiencies in the administration and corruption, government end up paying higher prices than market-related prices, which it defeats the tendering system. How we start in terms of the tendering system, they are based on the procurement plan of a department or of an organization. So basically, there will be a strategy that a department or a government institution develops. From that strategy, there will be a procurement plan or demand plan where they identify goods and services that they will require in that financial year. Once they have identified goods and services that they require, and they will identify in terms of how much and when do they need it. So what will happen is, once those goods are required, then the relevant manager or the responsible person will draft a specification of goods and services that they are looking for and submit it to the specification committee. That will sit and make sure that that specification is accurate and it meets the strategic needs of an organization. So once the specification is completed, then it's put into a tender document to be advertised to the public. So normally they advertise it either online on government tender or also on newspapers, and then bidders or people who qualify. Okay, sometimes people who don't qualify also bid, but people who qualify, they bid for that tender and it gets evaluated. And the evaluation is based on mainly two categories. First is the technical side of things, the tender specification in terms of deliverables. So they will assess all the tenders that have been submitted on technical spec to say, do these people who submitted meet the technical spec? And they have certain score, and depending on the nature of the tender, then they will allocate a score. So all those who meet the technical spec, then they will move to the second phase, which is the pricing. So those who didn't meet the technical spec, they get eliminated from the process. And now when you get to the pricing, then it depends on mainly B score, depending on the size of the tender. So the person who gets the highest points on the pricing side is the person, or not the person necessarily, the organization will be the organization that is awarded the tender. Or as an owner for a business, you need to understand that not all procurement by government goes on tender, or by large corporates goes on tender. They have policies in place to determine which procurement goes on tender. So now, but the focus now will focus on the government because it's the properly legislated one. In terms of government, the tenders that are not, okay, the procurement that are up to $1 million, they can either be on 3 quotation or request for proposal, not necessarily tender, just request for proposal. And for the tenders that are above $1 million, or not the tenders, the procurement that is above $1 million, supposed to be on tender. Previously, it was up to 500,000. So previously, up to 500,000, an organization can decide if they request quotations or they request for proposals, and then anything above 500,000 is supposed to go on tender. But currently, with the amendment that happened, I think last year, all the procurement up to R1 million, they can either be on 3 quotations or on request for proposals. That's quotation system. We're going to go into that. And those goods and services that are more than $1 million, those ones, a department or a state organ must put that on tender. So it gives everyone an opportunity to bid for the contracts that are above R1 million. So you need to be able to know and understand the differentiation between when does a department goes on tender or when does the department can request for quotations. They are up to R1 million as we speak today, 2022, up to R1 million, and a government department can request 3 quotations. And anything above R1 million, they need to go on tender. Unless that's the standard regulations, unless they have some emergency procurement or any other deviation that they want to do. But if there's no application for deviation or it's not an emergency need, then they have to put anything above R1 million to tender. But during emergency or when they were approved for deviation, then they can request 3 quotation or proposal for projects that are more than R1 million. But if they don't have that, if it's not emergency or they don't have any special approval, they need to put everything above R1 million on tender. I know this lesson is about tenders, but I'll just go through as well in terms of the request for quotation or request for proposal, so that you understand that you don't necessarily, it's not always tenders. Government procurement can be on quotation. So the quotation process, how it works is, as I said earlier, the required goods and services must be less than 1 million, and they need to get at least 3 quotations for the services, as well as competitive bidding. So they request for 3 quotations from the specific suppliers who are listed on CSD, which is Central Supply Database, which was established by government to make sure that all businesses register on CSD. So if you wish to do business with the state, you need to make sure that your organization is on CSD. So what they'll do is they'll look at the vendors or suppliers that are on CSD that are supplying that specific product or service that they are looking for, and then they can choose 3 or they can choose more, but at least they must get 3 quotations. Then they request quotations from those suppliers, and when they receive the quotation, they evaluate those quotations. Most of the time, because of the lower amount, sometimes the accounting officer, the head of the HOD or the CEO of a parastatal can decide not to consider the BE points. But most of the time, they do consider the BE points, most especially if the procurement is above 30,000. So once they receive the quotations and they receive your BE certificate, it can be a sworn certificate or a verified BE certificate. Then they check, they allocate points to your BE score. So if they are considering the BE points, 80% will be for your pricing and 20% will be for your BE score. So whoever gets the highest the highest points in pricing will get the job, will be allocated the job and appointed and enter into the service level agreement and execute the job. So, but how do you get the highest points in pricing? So what they do is they allocate 80% to pricing. So if you have the lowest price, let's say you are part of the 3 suppliers and you have the lowest price, then if you have the lowest price, they'll give you 80%. Then if you have the highest or the lowest BE score, let's say you are a level 1, they'll give you 20%. So you'll get 100% of the score. Then you are the one who's getting the tender. But if, let's say, you have the lowest price, which they're going to give you 80%, and then, unfortunately, your BE score, let's say, is 8, then they'll give you 0 for the BE score. So your pricing points will remain at 80%. And someone else who might have priced a little bit above you, but they have a better BE score. Let's say they get 70% for pricing. They can still get 20% for the BE score. Combined is 90%. And you with the lowest price of 80%, you still lose out to the person who priced a little bit more than you, but only because the person has a lower BE score. So it's not always on the lowest price. You need to understand this. It's not always on the lowest price. It is the quotation, even on the tenders. I'm not going to go into the pricing as well when we're doing the tenders, but even for the tenders, they go for the highest points when it comes to pricing. They are looking at the lowest price and they look at your BE score. So in combination, those two, depending on how much points you get from your price and your BE score, it will determine if they allocate the project to you. Okay, that was on the pricing, but when they're doing the evaluation, they're not only looking at that. Also, they're looking at your tax affairs. Do you have a tax clearance? And now, remember, it's not just the tax clearance, they use the tax PIN, which means they can check live if today you are compliant in terms of your tax affairs. You can have You can have a tax clearance, but which expires maybe after a year. But in the process, between the expiry of your tax clearance, something can happen where you are not longer compliant. So the government department or whoever you are submitting your quotation to will be able to check live if at that specific point you are compliant. And the CSD as well monitors your tax compliant. So automatically when you start being compliant, you can have a tax clearance. But if you are not compliant, then your CSD will say non-compliant. And then you will not be appointed. So as a business, if you are doing business with government or large corporates that are using the tendering system, you need to make sure that your tax clearance is always in order. Make sure that you manage your BE score, because if you have a high BE score, that can put you on a disadvantage. But fortunately mainly because new venture creation is focused on SMEs, if you are doing anything less than 10 million rand and your organization is black, you automatically get a BE rating of 1, which is the highest you can get. So just make sure that you get your sworn affidavit. When you're submitting your tender documents, you submit your sworn affidavit and make sure you monitor your tax affairs to make sure that even though you have a tax clearance, it doesn't mean at that specific point in time you are tax compliant. So regularly check your CSD to check if your organization is tax compliant, because that can put you on a disadvantage. So once those things are evaluated, okay, before even we get to the evaluation, there are SBD forms that you need to make sure that you complete. Even if you are doing quotations, if you are dealing with government, there are SBD forms that you need to make sure that you complete properly. But later on in the session, we're going to go through the example, show you how you complete those SBD forms. But make sure that you complete them the way it's required, because if you submit a quotation, you might have the lowest price and the lowest BE rating, but the way you completed your SBD forms can disqualify you. So just make sure that you know how to complete the SBD forms. If you don't know how, watch this lesson towards the end. We'll show you how you complete those SBD forms. It's not a rocket science. They are simple, but make sure that you know what to complete where. And once the successful college bidder has been identified, then the person gets notified and they enter into the necessary contract arrangement, and you deliver your goods and services, and they pay you after you deliver. And it's a government policy that they're trying to pay all the suppliers within 15 days. I know they struggle, but they have an obligation to pay you within 15 days of invoice. So, but when you are invoicing to reduce the challenges or the delay in payment, make sure that your invoice is properly it's complete. It's got all the details that needs to be there. It's signed properly. It's got dated, and it's got proper invoice numbers, VAT numbers, tax numbers, address, and all that. Make sure that you verify those things, because those are some of the things that delay your payment process. But if everything is in order, then your invoice is supposed to be paid within 15 days. That is our that is a quoting system within the government. That's how it works. It's simple. They just go into the CSD, choose suppliers, send them the request for quotation or for proposals. Then they receive those, they evaluate them based on what they're looking for, and then they award, and then whoever is awarded enter into an agreement, and then you deliver, and then you get paid. That's now for the quoting system. Using the quoting system, meaning for all procurement that are below R1 million. A department can use requests for quotations or requests for proposals. Okay, that's that. And then now we're going to go into the tendering system. Okay, now we're going into the tendering system. So these are for those procurements that are above R1 million. They must go in tender. So Okay, first we'll start with the internal process within a department or a government institution. The first thing is the responsible manager will have to compile what they call a bid document. Then that bid document, it's a technical spec in terms of the goods and services that are required. They need to mention specific things that are required and certain level of competencies, accreditation or licenses that are required in a bid document. Then that bid document goes to bid evaluation committee. Once it gets to a bid evaluation, they evaluate it for making sure, they're evaluating it to make sure that one, it's in line with the strategic objective of that department. Two, it's got a budget for it. It's a line item that is budgeted for. Three, to make sure that the specifications are what is required by that department. So to make sure that when the tender goes out, it's got the correct spec, because they might have to re-advertise if the tender goes out with the incorrect spec. Once the bid document is being evaluated and approved by the bid evaluation committee, then now we're getting into inviting the bidders. That's advertising the tenders. So currently they need to advertise generally. Obviously there are certain exceptions in emergencies and all that, but they need to advertise the tenders for at least 21 days. That's the guideline that is there, unless they can motivate for a shorter period or for a longer period. But generally, it must be advertised for 21 days. And it gets advertised in the tender bulletin. It gets advertised on newspapers. It can be, depending on the type of organization, it can be local newspapers or it could be national newspapers, depending on the nature of the services and the organization that is advertising. Once the tender is advertised, it's got a closing date. That tender is supposed to be, the closing date is a date that the bidders or the potential suppliers needs to submit their tender documents. It's got a specific closing date. And a department or an organization can decide to call a briefing session. One, it could be a compulsory briefing session, depending on the complexity of goods and services that they are looking for. So they can call for a compulsory briefing session. So if the tender spec define that you need a compulsory briefing session, if you want to bid for that tender, you need to make sure that your organization is represented at that briefing session, if it's compulsory. If it's not compulsory, you don't have to attend. You can still bid, submit your tender documents without attending the briefing session. But if the tender documents specify that the briefing session is compulsory, you need to make sure that you attend the briefing session and sign the attendance register. Or you have a representative who's attending the briefing session on your behalf and make sure that they sign the attendance register, because it's one of the documents that they're going to use to phase evaluation on the compliance side. If you didn't attend the compulsory briefing session, your submission is out. So read the tender documents nicely. Make sure that you understand that whether there is a compulsory briefing session or not, and note the closing date, because any submission post the closing date, they get checked out. Now the tender is out, it's advertised where it's supposed to be advertised, and then you receive the tender. You look at the technical specification, you see that, no, my organization meets this technical spec. I have all the information that they require. So you complete the tender document and you submit the tender document. The tender needs to be submitted into a tender box, which is got a closing time. They will specify on the tender document when that tender is supposed to be submitted. So there will be a specific time that it needs to be submitted. And then once it's submitted, once that time passes, then the department will come and then open the tender box. Sometimes they invite bidders to come and watch them as they open the tender box and check who submitted, who didn't submit. So as an entrepreneur, it's also your responsibility. You can't submit and walk away because the departments and government is accused of corruption and all that. So you need to know that you have a right to wait until after that time. An official must come to open the tender box and count the submission, name, organization, and all that. So they do a roll call on who submitted, so that there won't be any tenders that sneak in after the closing date, or the closing time. Because if anything, you submit after the closing time, it's supposed to be rejected. And if you don't wait to make sure that you know the list of companies that submitted on time, yes, you might complain that somebody didn't submit or somebody was not there during the closing time, but you don't have a way of verifying because you were not there and you didn't open, you didn't know the number of bidders that have bid for the tender that you're also competing for. So that's one very important one. It's one of the control mechanisms that are there to make sure that there are no tenders that sneak in after closing time or date for that specific tender. All those tenders which were submitted on time, then they get to the evaluation process. The evaluation process, generally, the first phase of the evaluation process is on the compliance. So what they go through, they don't look at your technical ability and all that. They look at your legislative compliance. One, did you complete the tender document the way you're supposed to have completed them? That's the first thing that they look at. Did you sign where you're supposed to sign? Did you complete all the information on those SBD forms? It's very, very important. I know it's just an administrative process, but you need to make sure that you complete your SBD forms the way they're supposed to be completed. Sign where you're supposed to sign. Initial where you're supposed to initial. Provide details where you're supposed to. Don't skip anything. And the most importantly, be honest and truthful when you're completing the tender document, because it might come back to bite you. So that's the first part. They look at the tender document that you submitted. If you completed them the way you're supposed to have. They look at if BE is important. They look at the BE certificate. Does it meet the requirement? Even though they won't reject your tender submission based on BE certificate, but they decide at that point if your tender certificate is valid and is the way it's supposed to be submitted. Then they look at your tax affairs, your CSD. Is your CSD compliant? That's the third one. And registration forms, any other thing that they might have specified as for compliance. Because they specify to say, for compliance purposes, these are specific things, legislative documents that are required. But I'm sure this will be there. The company documents, the ID copies of the directors, the CSD forms or the tender forms that's supposed to be completed, the tax clearance. Now they no longer need the tax clearance, they need the PIN, but that needs to be in place. Your CSD must say compliant. Your BE certificate must be also compliant, the way they requested the BE certificate. It should be compliant. So these are the core things that you need to make sure you have in place for when you're submitting your tender. That's the first point of evaluation. So if none of those, except for BE certificate, none of those are non-compliant, your tender is out. Then those who meet those statutory requirements, they now move them to the technical evaluation. Okay, now those who have successfully completed all the documents and their documents are in order and complete, they move to the technical evaluation. On technical evaluation, it's basically the tender spec, where they specified specific things that they're looking for. So they're going to evaluate you out of 100, based on those specific things that they are looking for, there are certain scores that are allocated to each item that they are looking for. So sometimes, most of the time, they say 70%. It can be 90% or whatever the percentage that they put there that you should meet in terms of the spec for you to move to the third stage. So on the spec, sometimes they'll want experience of your team. They'll want your maybe reference letters. They'll want your accreditations, your licenses if those are required. Those are mainly the three things that they look for, and there can be other specific things that you must have. Certain level of accreditation or certain level of licenses that you must have. But the most important part that they're looking at, technically, will you be able to execute the project? So, but it will be in the tender specification to say, one, we're looking at this skills level, then you submit supporting documents to prove that you have that skills level. They need certain skills level in terms of the team members, certain skills level in terms of the organization. So sometimes they might want reference letters. Most of the time they want reference letters. So if you are in the business that you want to do or do tenders with government, make sure that when you provide service to your clients, request your reference letters upfront. Don't wait for a tender to be issued and request a reference letter. Make sure that you request reference letters from your clients so that you always have it. Okay, the reference letters are not only going to help you when you're doing the tenders, but at least they give you even feedback from your customers to see how your business is doing. So that is not only going to help you when you're doing the tenders, but it's going to also help you in terms of monitoring the performance of your organization. But do the references before, not when you see the tender, you start running around looking for reference letters. If you provide a service which you believe is important and you know that at some time in the future you might want to, it's a similar service that you might be supplying to government, then request your clients to give you reference letters. The more reference letters you have, the better chances that you'll get in terms of getting tenders. So in terms of that shows the experience. And in terms of the team, you need to make sure that you have the right team in place that meet the requirement of the business that you are in. If you are flying solo, find partners, people that you can use each other's documents in terms of submitting, but have an agreement and an understanding with certain people in terms of experience that if I bid for this, I'll use your profile or your name in the project, or if you get the project, this is how we're gonna operate, you're gonna compensate each other and all that. Have the agreements with relevant people up front so that when it's time to, because you only have 21 days, you don't have to be running around trying to find people with skills and all that. Build your network, make sure that you have a database of people with skills that you might need in future for your tenders. Make sure that you have that database. Make sure that you have a sufficient or a good number of reference letters from your clients that you're supplying, so that when that time comes, you're not running around trying to get reference letters. So, and then make sure that you have all the accreditations that you might need or the licenses that might be required, depending on the sector that you are in. Make sure they're in place, updated, they haven't expired, because sometimes you have accreditations and a tender comes, you realize that it's expiring or they have expired. Now you're trying to run around trying to address the expiry of your documents, and you might miss the closing date. 21 days is not a lot. So make sure that you are always business ready, tender ready with your documentation. You know where to find them. Make sure that your company documents are in place. You always have your tax clearances and your certified IDs, certified company documents. Those are the basic things that the tender documents, the tender evaluation will be looking at. So now, once they evaluate the technical ability of those who submitted the tenders, if you meet that threshold, let's say 70%, they give you 100 points, depending if you meet certain points, they give you whatever the points to that. And then if you meet that 70% or 80%, depending on what they want, or in terms of the threshold. If you meet that threshold, then you move to usually the last part, which is the pricing. So those who don't meet the 70% technical ability, then they get eliminated in that tendering process. Or those who didn't submit the supporting documents or the documents that are required in terms of the tender spec, you get eliminated in that process. And those who meet the spec, submitted all the documents, and they scored sufficient points above the threshold that has been set, then they move to the price evaluation. Okay, now, because the technical part is done, and those bidders who successfully met the threshold are now evaluated on pricing. Pricing, as I said earlier, it works exactly the same with the request for quotations. Yes, they're looking for the lowest price, right? Now, because everyone meets the technical competency. So now they're looking at the lowest price, but there's a misconception amongst entrepreneurs that they are only looking for the lowest price. No, the evaluation, they are looking for the highest pricing points. So the higher the points you get with your pricing, then the person who gets the highest point will be the person who gets appointed, who gets the highest points on pricing. Now, I need to repeat it. I know I went through it when I was doing the quotations, but I'm going to repeat this. The pricing is not the lowest. Yes, the lowest gives you an advantage. It gives you either 80% or 90% advantage. But there will be a 20% and 10% that's coming from your BE points. So how it works is, if the bids are below R1,000,000, then the 80-20 system is used to evaluate the pricing. So you have 80-20, which the two makes 100, right? So the 80 is allocated to the price, and the 20 points are allocated to your BE score. All right, now let me just give you an example on how the pricing evaluation gets done, or how they do it. Let's say in the previous example that I gave, that you have 3 suppliers that have met all the requirements and the technical competencies. Now they get to the pricing evaluation. Let's say the supplier number 1 prices 100 Rand for that product. Supplier number 2 prices 120. Supplier number 3 prices 150. Let's say these tenders are below R1,000,000. So they are using an 80-20 evaluation matrix. So on the 80-20, so it means the supplier who charged the lowest, which is 100, will get all the 80 points. The supplier who charged the 120, because that supplier, the price is higher than the lowest supplier, will get about 64 points. The one who charged 150 will only get 40 points because he charged 50% more than the one who charged 100 Rand. So that's how the points are allocated for the 80. So the one who charged the lowest at 100 has got 80 points. The one who charged 120 has got 64 points. The one who charged 150 has got 40 points, right? Now, it gets to the BE rating. Let's say the one who charged 100 Rand has got a BE rating of 8. So he doesn't get any points for BE rating. He gets 0. So his final points will be still 80 because he doesn't get the points for BE because the BE rating is 8 or 9, whatever the highest that you can get, the invalid ones. Or he didn't submit the BE rating, or the approved BE rating. So they gave him 0 for it. So it's the lowest. He's got 80, the whole 80, because it's the lowest supplier. 80 points, but the total points are still 80 because he gets 0 for BE points. Now, let's go to supplier 2. He charges 120. He doesn't get all the 80 points because his price is higher than 100. So he gets 64 points for pricing, which is lower than the supplier who charged 100 because you got all the 80 points. Now, but this supplier has got his house in order. He's got the BE certificate, which is level 1. Then he gets all the 20 points that are allocated for BE certificate. So now you take his 64 on pricing, you add the 20, then he gets 84 points, which is higher than the one who had 100, who charged 100. He only has 80. And then the one who charged 115, he's got 40 points. Let's say also he's got level 1 BE points. He gets the 20. His total points will be 60. So now we have one who's got 80 points. We've got one with 84 points. We've got one with 60 points. So the one who will be allocated or given the contract is the one with 84 points because he's got the highest points in the pricing. Not necessarily the lowest price, because the one with the lowest price, he doesn't have BE certificate, so he didn't get the BE points. He only got full marks for price because it's the lowest. He got 80, but he didn't get the BE points, so his final score is 80. But the one who's the second highest price, he gets 64 points for pricing, but he gets all the points for BE score. So in total, he's got 84 points, which makes him the winner of that tender. So that's how the pricing works. I know it's a little bit complicated, but that's the logic around it. That's how it gets calculated. It's not always the lowest price. It's the highest BE points. And once the approval or the recommendation has been made by the bid evaluation committee. So these people who are doing the evaluations are bid evaluation committee. Then they make recommendations to the bid adjudicating committee. Then that committee will see if the process was fair and all that, and they make the final decision on who gets appointed. Generally, unless if there's something that went wrong with the supply chain process, they will normally recommend or approve the recommended winner from the bid evaluation committee. So the adjudication committee is there to make sure everything else that was done by the evaluation committee is in order, and they are also happy with the processes that they've been followed, and the person who won the tender is allocated, and now it gets into the process of once allocated, then the winner gets notified. The people who were not successful are also supposed to be notified, but generally they don't. But you have a right to access the information to understand where you went wrong. So the winner gets notified, then the negotiations and contracts and delivery, service level agreement are entered into, and the person supplies the goods and services, and then the person gets paid. That's the tendering process. So it's an open, fairly competitive process that if you make sure that you submit all the documentation the way they're supposed to be submitted, you clearly meet the technical specification, then your pricing is the best and you have good BE points, then the chances of you successfully securing the tender are very, very high. And that's on an ideal world, a perfect world. That's how the tendering process is supposed to work. Yes, we have stories about the corruption and all that. That's a different story. So, but technically, this is how it's supposed to work. You need to make sure that your documents are in order. You meet the technical specification of that specific tender that you are applying for or you are submitting, and your pricing needs to be competitive. And not only the pricing, but as well as your BE score. So when it comes to pricing, obviously, it's very, very competitive sector, the tendering process. So what you need to do is to make sure that you have your costing correctly. That's where now most contracts or tenderpreneurs fail. It's on the costing part, because you are obsessed about being the lowest. You end up cutting corners in your pricing, and you might end up not being able to deliver. On the pricing, it's very, very important. You need to make sure you price correctly so that you can achieve the appropriate profit from the project that you're doing. Because if you don't price it correctly, you might end up making a loss from a tender, and there are a lot of people who are making losses from tender process. And some that I've seen is they price things correctly, but they forget to price in call it the bribe that they pay. Not that I'm encouraging people paying bribe, but it's a reality. South Africa, we know there's a lot of corruption that happens. You find that you price your things correctly, but the bribe or the marketing fee that you pay, you find that it makes the tender not profitable or not viable. So be careful when you're negotiating you're not supposed to be negotiating your bribe and all that. You're not supposed to be doing that. But if you're doing that for whatever reason that you're doing it, make sure that you're taking that into account. And the other thing that most entrepreneurs forget about is the tax. You still have to pay companies tax. You still have to pay VAT. You still have to pay the employee tax. So those are the taxes that when you're doing the costing for your tender, make sure you take those into account. Because without taking that into account, you might end up not paying SARS, and you deliver on the tender, you eat the profit, and 5 years later, SARS comes knocking, looking for his money. And you don't have his money because you didn't take it into account. You end up in trouble with SARS, and you don't want to be in trouble with SARS because they will liquidate you. So the tax portion is the tax portion. The VAT is the VAT. Make sure that you put it aside. Make sure that when you're doing the costing, you take those things into account. Because if you don't take them into account, it might land you in trouble. So mainly, those are the things that is the bribe money that tenderpreneurs, they don't take into account when they're doing the costing. The tax, which is the company tax, and the VAT and the employee tax that they will pay to execute the project. Those are sometimes, they're not necessarily hidden costs, but those are costs that actually they have nothing to do with executing the project. They're actually the costs that are there, but you need to take them into account when you're doing your costing. Let's say you have taken those into account. As well, the tendering process is competitive. So make sure that you get your best suppliers. But don't only just get the cost of the goods. They still need to be delivered on site. So the costing process, the delivery process of those goods and services, there is a cost to it. They might be delivered by truck or whatever. They might have to be, maybe you're buying it in China or wherever you're buying it, they still have logistic costs that you need to pay. So don't only take the cost of the product or the service into account, take the logistic cost as well into account when you're doing the costing. Make sure you put enough margins for you to say, if anything, maybe there's price fluctuation, you still be able to deliver. Because most of the time, the tender is a fixed price project. You charge them, and then it's a fixed price. If things goes up, it's none of their business. Then your tender will end up not being profitable, and you'll end up delivering a shoddy job. So take the logistics into account to get the product where you're supposed to deliver it. Provide a buffer, because you might not know what might happen. So you need to make that provision in your costing. Contingency cost is called. You don't know, maybe generally you provide about 5% of contingency to say anything can happen. Price can go up, and if they go up, it still needs to be covered. And in this process, there's also not only the goods and services that you need to price, as well as a project management cost. There's somebody who needs to make sure things are delivered. That requires time. So you need to allocate as well the price for project managing the whole thing. Yes, there might be employees in the project who are doing the actual work, which you might have costed. But you as an entrepreneur, you might have to hire a project manager. Or you might have to project manage that project yourself. You need to get paid. So take that into account as well as you cost your tender documents. Because they're important. That's the biggest pitfall that you see a lot of entrepreneurs fall into, because they understand the pricing is very important. They cut it too thin. Don't cut it too thin. There are a lot of tenders in government. If you don't get this one, you might get another one. So just make sure that you cost it properly in terms of the actual cost of goods and services. Take into account your project management. Take into account the contingency fee that you need to provide for. But most importantly, don't forget SARS. Don't forget the VAT that you need to pay. Don't forget the company tax that you might have to pay if you make a profit from your operation. There is a tax, company tax, that you still need to pay. I mean, VAT is 15%. Profit is 28%. So you take those into account when you're doing your costing, so that you make sure that your costing is sufficient for your organization or for your company to make profit after the event. Because if you don't do the proper costing, it will lead to you trying to buy the cheaper material, trying to cut corners, not paying people enough, not bringing in the right skill to execute the project, because you're trying to save cost, and you end up delivering a poor work, which now it might affect your reputation and your organization. So pricing is very, very, very important. And when you're pricing, don't take the first quote that you get when you're looking for goods and services outside. Make sure you do your research. Make sure you engage. Make sure that you get quotations from reliable suppliers. Because you might get a quotation from a shoddy business that is not doing things proper. When it's time to deliver, they can't deliver the quality or the quantities that you're looking for. And that will affect your business. Then you need to go find another supplier. So make sure that the suppliers that you get your quotations from, they are reliable, and make sure that you understand your sector in terms of the price fluctuation, so that you don't find yourself underpricing. But yes, it's very competitive. You need to price correctly. But don't cut it too thin. Make sure that you have a little bit of a buffer in your pricing, so that you still remain competitive, even if the market dynamics change. Okay, in summary, these are the key points that you need to take from what we have discussed so far. One, you need to be able to get hold of the bid documents and analyze them to check if you meet the technical expertise that they are looking for, and that you are able to deliver on those technical expertise. And two, you need to make sure that you cost your proposal correctly, to make sure that you have sufficient profit from the project, and you take out into consideration all the contingencies that you might have to take into account, and your what do you call it, the tax. Take those into account when you're doing your costing. So those are the key important things that you need to look at. Now, next is we're going to look at the business models, and if your business is ready for tenders. Okay, now the next session we're looking at the businesses that goes into tendering business, and if your business is ready for tenders. Look, in terms of tendering, I know it's got a bad name. They call them tenderpreneurs, but that's a different kettle of fish altogether. Remember, all organizations, big ones, your banks, your mining companies, your big retailers, your insurance companies, they all bid for tenders. Don't be mistaken thinking tenders are only for tenderpreneurs. Tenders are massive in the country. So any big business that you know of, they have some kind of business that they're doing with government. Government is the big buyer in the country. So if you're not doing business with the big buyer, then you're not in the game. So don't get discouraged by being called tenderpreneurs and all that. That is the big market that you shouldn't ignore. You can't ignore that market. Make sure that you find a way to service that market. You can either service it directly or indirectly. Indirectly, I mean you service people who are servicing government. If you are manufacturing something, you might not want to tender directly, but you sell your product to people who are supplying government, because that's a big market. So you can't ignore the tender market. The most important thing is obviously not over-reliance on tenders. So there are certain tenderpreneurs, in my understanding, is those people who are basically doing buy and supply. They don't have specialty. They just do buy and supply. They just look for whoever who's looking to buy, which department is buying what, and they just quote and submit and make sure that they get or try to get anything that is there out on tender or on quotation. So, but that's a bad way of doing business, because that's not sustainable. That's called tenderpreneurs. But with entrepreneurs, with businesses, you need to have an operating business that is doing business, not only with government. That business must be able to operate or do business with other entities which are not government, private sector. If you are selling something, you can be able to sell to other businesses, private businesses or individuals. So make sure that you have a business that's generating income, not only from tenders. It can generate income from other businesses or servicing other customers. That's the first thing that you need to make sure. But even though you have comfortable customers, which is not government, but government is the biggest spender. So find a way in terms of in your business model to service government. Even if it's not direct, find people who are servicing government, build partnerships, because the government market is massive. Your banks are big customers. Their biggest customer is government. Yes, it might appear that the biggest customer is individuals, but they're making money from government. Call it mining companies. They need the mining rights. They need certain things from government that they need. They tender for mining rights. They always tender this. They find that there are properties that are available to be mined. The mining companies, they advertise them. Mining companies apply and they supply. Insurances, all these things, big insurance companies, they apply for tenders. I know some time back, ABSA actually suffered a lot because when Maria Ramos took over, they lost a lot of government because of the political alliance of Trevor Manuel. He was with Thabo Mbeki and the government was of that Jacob Zuma. So ABSA lost a lot of government business. And that thing really, really affected the performance of ABSA. It affected their bottom line. They were not growing as they used to, and they had to find a way and restructure and find a way to replace that business from government that they have lost. Obviously, they didn't lose all of it. They lost a lot of it, and that's why it performed badly during Maria Ramos' stint at ABSA, because they lost a lot of government business. So big businesses are doing business with government. Government is the biggest spender. So even you as an entrepreneur, yes, you might be doing business with individuals, but look at the best way that you can do business with, either directly with government or with people who are doing business with government. You can supply people who are doing business with government, but don't completely ignore that. It is an opportunity. If you are supplying, selling cooking oil or whatever it is that you are selling, there are hospitals that are procuring meat and all those things. So you look at institutions that could be your customers, do your research, find their procurement plan, their strategy on procurement, understand it, know that you are preparing yourself to be ready to supply them should the opportunity arise. And supplying government or up to submitting tenders, it also helps small businesses to improve their systems, because there are certain requirements. Remember, I talked about technical requirements earlier. There are certain technical requirements that are required when you're submitting tenders. So if you don't have them in place, then as a small business, you'll strive to improve your business so that you have those technical requirements in place so that you'll be able to tender. So tendering is a very big market to ignore. If possible, don't ignore it, investigate it, see where the opportunities for your business. There's lots of opportunities in the tendering for business, with most especially with government. And sometimes, yes, you can design your business model around tenders, but that will be a bad strategy. Not always, because if you look at one of the case studies that we use in almost all of our lessons, you look at AEY, the War Dogs, from the War Dogs movie. AEY, they established their business to only service the US military. That's it. That was their business. They focused on that. So they specialized. They were not submitting tenders everywhere. They decided that we're going to specialize in supplying the US defense government. So the Defense Department. So that's all that they did. They focused on that. They made sure that they build networks in the arms or in the arms industry. Make sure that they have the networks to know that when the tender comes out, they know who to speak to. So they build a very strong network with arms manufacturers to make sure that when certain tenders comes, they know who to speak to, who are the suppliers in this space. So even though they were tenderpreneurs, but they build a specific knowledge or expertise around arms, which is different from just tendering for everything that comes. Sometimes, yes, you can focus on tenders, but you specialize. Make sure that if you specialize, you know that sector, you understand the government strategy in that sector. You do your research, you will know who are the suppliers in that space, so that when tenders comes, then you know who to speak to. If they're looking for certain products, you know where to find them. You're not running around when you see the tender. You know you already have built your network in that industry that you specialize on. So, to hear me correctly, I'm not saying you can't specialize in tenders. As I'm giving an example of AEY, they specialized in tenders which specifically with arms. They were supplying arms to the US defense. So you can do the same, but you need to do your industry analysis. Understand that market. Is the market big enough to sustain your business? Can you survive on this? Are there enough tenders to go around? Because you're not going to win all of them. Do you have relationship with the suppliers in that space for you to focus on that specific market? And then while I'm talking about AUI, here's the clip about their business model, which is focused on tenders. It shows how they make their money. It shows that the focus is on the US defense, which is spending billions in defense. So they focus on that. They ran their organization, focus on that specific market, that specific section of the market, one department, not many departments. They just the Department of Defense. They focus on that, build relationship in that space, and they were successful.
AEY's business model is outwork competitors, search, focus on smaller contracts ignored by larger players, pay good commissions to employees. They use money as a motivational factor. They didn't focus on soft HR issues like employee satisfaction, career path, and morals. Their focus was on making money no matter what. AEY's business model, therein no invention, no differentiation. They cast their search for contracts wider and deeper. AEY maintains a culture of hard work to remain competitive. AEY secured contracts purely because of hard work. Normally, organizations tendering for defense contracts use public relations and lobbying. AEY didn't normally use public relations and lobbying, but targeted the crumbs that big competitors ignored.
Complete the assignment. Compare how the topic is addressed in the three movies and rank them according to your preference on how the characters and the organizations dealt with the topic and motivate your ranking, 1 being the best and 3 the worst. Analyze this topic and its applicability to your situation and industry. Write up your analysis to meet the requirement of the industry you're operating in. Update the relevant section in your business plan. Customer marketing was not important to AUI. To increase its revenue, it focused on working hard to identify as many potential contracts that it can bid for. As AUI's contract size increased, its profile and technical competency also increased. This enabled them to surface bigger contracts and this increased their revenue. In certain businesses like tendering, experience is a good marketing tool. Initially, you may have to take small and unprofitable businesses to build your name. To potential employees, Ephraim marketed and branded the company as a place that will make them rich. AUI built relationships and a good name with major suppliers. Complete the assignment. Compare how the topic is addressed in the three movies and rank them according to your preference on how the characters and the organizations dealt with the topic and motivate your ranking, 1 being the best and 3 the worst. Analyze this topic and its applicability to your situation and industry. Write up your analysis to meet the requirement of the industry you're operating in. Update the relevant section in your business plan.
As you have seen from the movie clip or the of AUI, they focus on the Department of Defense, and that market was big enough. But it's not something that I will encourage you as an entrepreneur to focus on one department, because if anything happens, then you might be out of business. And as I've said, that is for businesses, it's most important for you to diversify your revenue stream. Yes, you can specialize, but also seek other markets, most especially that is not government related. You can seek private sector markets. So combine the tender market and the private market, so that when the tendering market is dry, at least the private market will keep your business going. Now, the next question is your business ready to do business with government? One, the most important thing, your business must be registered. 2, it must be on CIPC. Okay, registered with CIPC. 2, it must be on Central Supplier Database. So it must be on CSD. And when you're on CSD, make sure that your business has got tax clearance, is compliant with the tax, is compliant with its tax matters. Yes, you can, as I said earlier, you can have a tax clearance, but if you don't comply throughout that tax period that you have tax clearance for, your business live, when they check it on CSD, you might have a tax clearance, but the business might be non-compliant. So make sure that you have your tax clearance, you have your tax SARS issues in order. Make sure that you have your B certificate. If you are a small business doing less than 10 million, SON certificate will do. Anything above that, then you need a verified B certificate. Obviously, you need to have your banking records or banking affairs in order. You must have a bank account. It must be open and active. Make sure you maintain that and you keep the records. And you have good credit record. If you might need fund, you don't know when you might need fund. You might get a big tender and you need funding, and then you might not be able to execute because your credit record is not good. So make sure you maintain your banking affairs or your financial affairs in order, and build relationship with your suppliers. Make sure that you have good relationship with your suppliers and you have your reference letters in place to make sure that whenever there are tenders, there might be reference letters that are required. Another important thing is make sure that you have people in place, the skills, people with skill sets that meet your industry standards. Different industries require different skills. So make sure that in your organization, you have people with the right skills, or you have a database of people that you can use for different projects. So make sure that you have sufficient human resource capital to execute different projects, because different projects might might require different skills. So you need to make sure that you have a data. If you don't have those people internally, but you must have a database of good people that you can use to execute your project. That's one of the most important things that you need to make sure that you work on, and you're always ready. And make sure that you are on UIF, and then you have your quotas are in place. You are compliant. You are paying what you're supposed to pay. You are making your skills development levies contribution if need be. Sometimes they need you to be in compliant, and as well as UIF. Make sure that you are compliant with UIF, because sometimes they want a letter of good standing from the Department of Labor to make sure that your organization is in good standing. Those are some of the things that you need to make sure that you have in place, so that you're always ready for business. Oh, and lastly, if your sector requires accreditation or SABS or licenses, make sure that your licenses are always ready. They're always polished, they're always up to date, so that whenever you submit your tenders, you are ready. Your accreditations, your licenses, or your SABS approvals are in place, or any other approvals that are required in your specific industry. So those are the things that you need to make sure that you have ready for you to be able to successfully operate in this space. You need to make sure that your compliance documents are in place. Okay, now the next question, which is the last topic that we're gonna address on this lesson, is where do you find these tenders? What are the sources? So the first place is the tender bulletin. It's free. Just search the tender bulletin from it's issued by Treasury, or it's issued by Treasury and government printers. So make sure that you regularly check the tender bulletin. I also check the newspapers. They release the tenders on newspapers as well. So go through the business section. They have tender section in newspapers. So because government is also forced to also advertise them. And sometimes there are specific departments that you are targeting. So they advertise on their website as well. So you can regularly visit their website to see if there are any tenders advertised for those specific department that you are targeting. And then as well as there are tender monitoring websites that monitor tenders, and maybe some of
those sites you need to subscribe and pay subscription fees and all that for them to monitor the tenders, and if there's anything in your space, then they send you the tenders and the tender documents. So as well, you can monitor the tenders, find them online, but you need to make sure that you do your research. You know which departments will issue tenders that are relevant to you. And one thing that how you can do it as well is you understanding the strategic objectives of each department, understand their a year plan, for the financial year that you are looking into, and understand their procurement spend. Remember, these things are more public in terms of their planning and the strategic planning. So have access to those. Know which department is going to do what, so that you can plan your business accordingly. You can understand that maybe in this financial year, which department is going to focus on which services, so that you can align yourself correctly, or you can align yourself with certain departments that are doing or will be providing goods and services in your space, so that you know you are ready, you know which departments to monitor, and build relationships within government as well, to know which tenders are coming when, so that you are always ready. You must do your research, make sure that you're ready. But the most important thing is to make sure that your business is ready. You've got all the registration documents, tax clearances and all that, and the reference letters,
so that when the tender comes out, you're not running around trying to find those compliant documents. They must be there. Now we're going into the lesson on how to complete tender documents. Yes, there are a few forms that are common in all the tender documents. Then we'll take you through the process and show you how to complete it as a guide, so that it can help you to practicalize the lesson that we've gone through today. Okay, guys, as discussed previously, that we're going to go through a practical example of how you complete a tender or a request for quotation or a request for proposal. Okay, the first thing that you're going to receive, or the first document that you're going to get, is the terms of reference. In terms of the terms of reference, it's where the department clarifies what is required, the services or the goods that are required, and when they're supposed to be delivered and how they are supposed to be delivered. If you look at this, we'll go through the request for quotation that we received from CEDA. And this one is for recruitment of informal and micro enterprises to participate in a TREP program. So if you can see here, the request for quotation has got the requisition number, it's got the date that it was issued, it's got the closing date. The closing date is very important because anything that you submit after the closing date is going to be rejected. So you need to make sure that you are aware from the beginning of the closing date. And they have the description in terms of the service that they are looking for. So in terms of this request for quotation, the service is to recruit informal and micro enterprises to participate in applying for assistance through the TREP program. And in the description, they went further in terms of clarifying which micro enterprises they are looking for. So in this case, they are looking for small businesses that are operating as chisanyama and cook mills, bakeries and confectionaries, personal care services, which are hair salons and beauty parlors, retail stores, artisans, automotives, as well as clothing and textile. So this is the description of the service that CEDA is looking for, and RMK was one of the service providers that were requested to submit the quotation. And under the terms of reference, which you need to always read carefully, you need to understand what is the purpose of the project, and they give you the background of the project. And most importantly, in number 3, they give you scope of work. In terms of the scope of work, it shows what they expect from you, the deliverables. So the scope of work is basically the deliverables. So in this case, they want the service providers to recruit 3 chisanyama and cooked meals businesses, 3 bakeries, 3 personal care, 3 business in automotives, and 3 business in clothing sector. And lastly, 3 business which are operating the spaza shops. Okay, in total, they require RMK or whoever the people that they've sent the quotation to recruit in total 18 small businesses. And furthermore, under the scope of work, under 3.2, they specified in terms of what they expect from the service provider. One is to provide the necessary to provide the SMEs with the necessary information. 2 is to make sure that these SMEs are registered on CIPC and with SARS. They have operating licenses or permits where they are operating from, because most businesses are operating illegally. So this business that needs to be recruited must be operating from businesses or premises that are licensed. And 3, they need to fill up the forms that CEDA will provide, and they need to have cash flow projections, and they need to be assisted to complete the TREP manual form and online application, which can be found on CIFA website and SMME SA web portal. And the service provider will need to help these SMEs to upload the supporting document on the website, and also ensure that all the necessary documentations that are required are uploaded. And lastly, the service provider that is appointed will have to develop a database of all these companies that have been identified. In total, these companies are supposed to be 18. So that is the scope of work. That is what is expected to be delivered. So when you submit the quotation must be based on this scope of work. This is what is called the term of reference. So when you're completing any tender document or request for quotation of proposals, they'll have the scope of work, the terms of reference, in terms of the deliverables that are expected. So make sure you read the deliverables, because this will guide you in terms of the extent or the quality or the quantity that is supposed to be delivered. So this will help us in determining how much we should charge SEDA for this service. And then moving on to number 4, they've highlighted there is project deliverables and time frames. So here they're setting up when they expect the services to be delivered and the time frame. So if I move to the last one, the closing date they emphasize is the 17th of May, which is as indicated in the opening page. And then the time is 11. So if you submit any time after that, then this quotation will not be considered. And then there's a completion date of the project, which is 30 July 2022. So these are the time frames that you need to keep in mind, or we need to keep in mind when we submit the request for quotation. And on number 5, SEDA has highlighted the roles and responsibilities of SEDA to assist the service provider in terms of the support that it might be required. And number 6, which is very important for tender evaluation, is the evaluation of proposals. So in this case, SEDA says it will allocate 100% of the score for functionality. So based on the document that you submitted, the total score is 100%. So it will depend on your organization if it achieves the 100% score or it achieves less than that. They said minimum is 100. So if you get 70%, that means you wouldn't be considered for pricing. So if your functionality, you don't achieve 100, basically you don't get 100 out of 100, then your proposal or your quotation will not be considered for pricing. So in terms of the scoring, how are they going to score the functionality? 1, they require the bidder to be registered on SEDA database. And then the service provider also must have completed or participated in the coupon program. So for you to get this 50 points, you need to be on the SEDA database and you should have completed their coupon program. So if you are on the database but you didn't complete coupon program, obviously you won't get the 50%. So automatically you don't qualify. So you mustn't waste your time submitting if you know that you wouldn't get 100%, because they've stated that people should get 100% for them to be considered for this. And another 50% on functionality, they've allocated it to registration of National Treasury Central Supplier Database, which is popularly known as CSD. So the service provider must be registered on CSD. If you are not registered on CSD, it means you wouldn't get this 50%, meaning you wouldn't meet the minimum 100% that is required. So if you don't get the 100%, that means your business or your organization doesn't qualify to move to the next level or the next stage of evaluation, which is the pricing. Okay, next we are going into the next stage. If you achieved 100%, then your proposal or quotation from RMK will be considered for pricing. During the lesson, we've explained in terms of how the pricing works. So they're not only going to look at the pricing, not only the lowest pricing, but they will also look at the triple BE points. So if you are a level 1, you'll get the 20 points, and if you have the lowest price, you'll get the 80. So if you have level 1 and you are the lowest, you have the lowest price, then you'll get the 100%. And the other person, if the ones who have priced higher than you, depending on your price, they wouldn't be able to get the 80 points. So 80 points will be allocated to the person who achieved the lowest price. And then 20 points will be allocated based on your B score. For example, if you have level 1 BE, you'll get all the 20 points. If you are level 8, for argument's sake, you'll get 0 points. So if you are level 8 and you are the lowest bidder, you'll only get 80 points. You won't get the 20 points for BE. But if you are level 1, you'll get the points. So let's say you priced the lowest, but you don't have the BE certificate. Then you get 0. So your total points will be 80. And then let's say the next bidder is not the cheapest. They won't get 80 points. Let's say they get 70 points. But their BE level is 1. Then they'll get the 20 here. So 70 plus 20 is 90. That means the second highest price will get the job because of the BE points. Even though you are the lowest, since you don't have the BE points, then your total score will only be 80. But the guy who quoted higher than you, but they have their BE points at level 1, they'll get 90, which is the highest points when it comes to pricing. And the contract will be awarded to the person with the highest points. Next, at number 7, it gives you the details of where you're supposed to submit and the person that you're supposed to submit to. In this case, it was TM Muloto with the email address and the contact details if needs to be contacted. And then lastly is terms and conditions. These are very important when you're reading your tender documents. So the first one is a valid tax clearance certificate must be submitted. Failure which you get disqualified. The second one is the SBD forms. They need to be attached to your quotation. Failure which your submission will be disqualified or your tender will be disqualified. Not lastly, but the third one is the submission of the valid B certificate. If you don't submit the valid B certificate, the BE points that we spoke about earlier, that 20 points, will not be allocated. So you might be the lowest bidder, but because you didn't submit a valid B certificate, then you might lose your BE points. And the people who quoted higher than you but submitted the B certificate might end up getting the contract or the tender. Okay, and then number 4, no late quotations will be accepted under any circumstances. It doesn't matter what happened, they wouldn't accept the late submission of the quotation. Suppliers must complete and return all required documents. These are the conditions. If you don't meet these standards or these minimum requirements, your quotation will not be evaluated. So when you're submitting the tender, make sure that you know the minimum requirements or the terms and conditions of submitting the tender. So even though this is the request for quotation, this also applies when you are doing the tenders. You need to know the minimum requirements, because without these minimum requirements, then your tender will be will not be evaluated. All right, so this is terms for quotations, which it's terms of reference, which you need to read carefully. Make sure that your organization has got the necessary skills and capacity to deliver on this. And then we read them carefully, so because they will also guide you in terms of how you should price, because they have deliverables of the project on number 4. You read the deliverables properly. Make sure that you know the skills and the time that is required to complete these deliverables, so that you'll be able to price your project accordingly, because pricing is very important. You might charge the lowest, but you find it difficult to deliver because you charge the lowest cost. So make sure that you read the deliverables and you understand what is expected from you, so that you can quote your project accordingly. The terms of reference, you need to read carefully. So when you download the tender documents, read the terms of reference, the deliverables, and make sure that you understand and you know what is expected. So in terms of this as well, they've added a checklist of the documents that will be required from those 18 SMMEs. So these are from A to R. These are the documents that when we submit the actual work, those SMMEs that they are looking for, these are all the documents that they expect to be attached to each and every client that we submit on completion date. That is the terms of reference. Now we're going to go into how you complete the actual SBD forms. Okay, now that we've read our terms of reference and we understand what is required, and from RMK we understand that we can meet the specification. We are registered with the CSD, we are on CEDA database, we've done their coupon program. So on functionality, we know we're going to get the 100%. On the pricing, we'll try and price it the best that we can so that we win the project. So now we're starting with the completion of the forms. The first form that we're going to work with is called SBD4, which is the declaration of interest. So since we are doing the government work, you need to declare your interest, because they don't want to give contracts or tenders to people who are conflicted. So for this one, we need to declare if there's any interest, or we know anyone from the CEDA side that might be involved in assessing this proposal. So it's always important to be honest about it. Where you have where you are conflicted, you need to make sure that you declare, so that they know upfront about your conflict of interest. So the SBD form, the first section that you need to complete, obviously you need to read it. It gives the instruction, but the first part is you need to give full name of bidder or his or her representative. So in this case, the representative is Maluse Mageta, which is me. Then it's my ID number. Okay, it's not my actual ID number. And then you fill up the position that you occupy in the business. Then you need to know the registration number of your company. So now this is the registration number of RMK Industries. And then here you fill the tax reference number of the company. So you need to make sure that you know your tax reference number, or because you'll be having your tax clearance, you complete it there. And if you registered for VAT, here you fill your VAT number. So after you completed this is the first page of your SBD form completed. Now, here they ask you a few questions to see if you are conflicted or not. So the first one in 2.7 Are you or any person connected with the bidder presently employed by state? If you have anyone who's connected to you, is close to you, and is employed by the state, you need to provide details. So connected is people who are close to you. In this case, I'll say no. But if it was a yes, you need to provide the details there. And then, if you are presently employed by the state, did you obtain the appropriate authority to undertake remunerative work outside your employment? I'm not employed by state, but if you are, then you need to choose yes. And if yes, you need to attach the proof that you have the authority to participate in business, to do business with the state. Failure to do that, then your bid will be disqualified. Okay, here now it's about the spouse. That did you or your spouse or any directors of the company or their spouse conduct business with the state in the previous 12 months? Then the answer here is yes. Here is just to make sure that you state if you have done business with the state in the previous 12 months, which in this case RMK has done. Then we'll just indicate that we had a CEDA project, NYDA project. Yes, those are the projects that we have done with the state in the previous 12 months. And then, sometimes here, it's very important that you're honest, because we tend to just second no, but they might find out that you've done business with the state. So people here, they tend to make the mistake of saying no while they've done the business with the state. So with 2.8, you need to be a little bit careful to make sure that you disclose and you are honest about it. Otherwise, your bid will be disqualified if they find out that you have done business with the state. And on 2.9, do you or any person connected to the bidder have any relationship, it could be family, friend, and other, with the person employed by the state and who may be involved with the evaluation or adjudication of this bid? So if you know anyone at CEDA, you have a friend at CEDA, family member who might be involved in the evaluation of this tender or quotation, you need to declare. But in this case, we don't know anyone. We don't have friend, family, or other at CEDA. So this, for us, it's a no, but you need to be honest about it. If there's any, you need to declare. Otherwise, the bid will be disqualified if you don't declare. So if you had said yes there, then here you need to give them the particulars of that person to make sure that if they are working for that institution, then they can excuse themselves from evaluating your tender. Now, here is it asking you, are you or any person connected with the bidder aware of any relationship, it could be family, friend, other, between any other bidder and any person employed by the state who is involved in evaluation of this tender? Do you know anyone who's connected with another bidder that will be involved in this? So do you know anyone who's connected to other bidders, your competitors in other words, who are bidding for the same contract, who's connected to that bidder who might be involved in this evaluation of tender? In this case, we don't know anyone. And if you know someone, then you need to make sure that you complete the particulars here of that person. And then this one is 2.11, where they're asking you, do you or any of the directors, trustees, shareholders, members of the company have any interest in any other related company whether or not they are bidding for this contract? So do you using two companies, or you are related to another company that will be bidding for this contract. If there is another company that you own, or you have a related, or your spouse owns, and it will be bidding for this contract, you need to tell them yes, and then you provide the details. But in this case, ours is a no. That's it. This is now where you're doing the declaration in terms of your relationship with the state, the relationship with the entity that has issued the tender, and the people who will be evaluating the tender. Okay, now at number 3, you need to provide full details of the directors and shareholders of the company. And in our case, the only director is Malusi Macheta, and the ID number is 80, whatever. It's not the true ID, but yeah, you put the ID number, then you put your personal tax number. You need to know the director's tax numbers. And the last part is if you have a personal number or state employee number, is if you work for a state, then you'll have this. But in this case, Mr. Malusi Macheta doesn't have a personal number or a state employee number. Then at the end is the signature page where Malusi Macheta declares. So you need to declare that you completed, you certify that this information you furnished in paragraph 2, 2, and 3 is correct, and you accept the responsibility and all that. That these are the conditions. Then you sign, you put your position there, and then you put the date that you completed this. I know I'm putting 2023-06, but it's just for demonstration. And then you put the name of the bidder. It's not you, it's the company that you are using here. So here, name of the bidder is the company that is bidding for the contract, and your position within that company. So that is the SBD form completed. That's the first form that you completed. All right, this one now we're going into the SBD 6.1. So the 6.1 is for the preferential points claim for the BE points. So as we discussed earlier, when you're completing it, because the value of this contract, it will not exceed 1 million rand, including tax. So because it's not exceeding 1 million rand, they will be using the 80-20 allocation in terms of the points. So the price, the lowest price gets 80, and then the BE points, you will get 20 for it. So then in total, you're gonna get the 100. Then this one, it's where the BE certificate come into play. Have you submitted the BE certificate? So if you submitted the BE certificate, valid, in this case, valid BE certificate. If you submitted the valid BE certificate, if you have level 1, you're gonna get all the 20 points. And depending on the pricing, if you are the lowest bidder, you're gonna get 80. And anyone who priced above you, then they'll get below 80, because you will be the lowest bidder. So it will be proportion to what you have priced. So if you are the lowest bidder, you're gonna get 80, and then if you have level 1, you get 20. So if you are the lowest bidder and you have level 1, you're gonna get 100 points. So you can't be beaten there. But if you are the second highest, then you won't get 80. You won't get full points for on the price. You only get full points on the BE score if you are level 1. And they've got a long explanation, but the important part is for the tenders below 1 million rand, they are using the 80-20 principle. And then for anything above this contract was above 1 million, they would have used 90-10. So in this case, they're going to use the 80-20. And these are the conditions they explain in terms of the BEE, the conditions that they're going to look at and the guiding factors of that. So they explain that if you are the exempt micro enterprise and the qualifying small enterprise and all that. So they explain the BEE, how it works, how it gets calculated. And in this page, they are showing you the points that you're going to get. If you are level 1, you get all the 20 points. If you are level 8, you get 2 points. If anything else, if you are a non-contributor, you get 0. So from these points that they showed in this page, 80-20. So here they're explaining the 20 to say, if you are level 1, your B contribution is level 1, you get 20 points. If you are level 8, you get 2 points. If you are a non-contributor, you don't have a B certificate or you submitted invalid B certificate, they give you 0. Then here, if you are subcontracting some of the work, you need to provide details. So in this case, we are not subcontracting. Okay, it's a small project, so we won't be subcontracting. And then here, if yes, then you need to give the percentage of how much will be subcontracted, the name of the subcontractor, the B level of that subcontractor, and whether the subcontractor is an EME, exempt micro enterprise. So meaning, is this subcontractor making a turnover of less than 10 million rand? So in terms of this, if you look at here, the contribution claimed in terms of this paragraph will be at the B level of, let's say in terms of this, you are level 1, points claimed, it will be 20 here. So we're claiming all 20 points because it's the 80-20 project. So then you have the narration in terms of the company, where you need to provide the details of company. So here you put the company name, which in this case is RMK Industries Pty Ltd. Then you put your number 678962, and then you put your company registration number. This is your company registration number. Okay, now on 9.4, they're asking you the type of company or firm. In this case, RMK is a PTY. Depending on the type of a company, then it might be a joint venture if you are submitting the project or the tender as a joint venture, or you can if you are submitting as a sole proprietor or a close corporation or any other company. But we are a PTY limited, so we tick that. And then here, briefly, you need to describe the nature of your business. What is your company in providing in terms of services? We're basically an enterprise development and training services company. Okay, actually here I just made a mistake. You need to make sure that you write in caps so that your writing is clear. So here you describe the principal business activities of your company. So as an RMK, we're enterprise development and training services company. And then company classification. How would you classify it? We're not manufacturing, we're not suppliers, we provide professional services. Then you tick there, and here you need to tick number of years that the company has been in existence. RMK is since 2012, so we are 10 years old. And then this side, as a bidder, then you sign, you date it. Okay, the date, you put the date, you put the address, where the company is based. Please just write in caps. Okay, I didn't write in caps there. I wrote in small caps, but make sure that you write in caps, and then you get witnesses to sign for us. Okay, here I have a witness who is gonna sign for me.
Doing now, and I'm amazing designer.
Okay, and then I'll ask another witness to sign for me, and then that's it. That's our SBD form 6.1 completed. Okay, now after the SBD form 6.1, now we'll be completing SBD form 8, which is the declaration of bidders' past supply chain practices. So this one is just to check if you had any transgression with government in terms of with the National Treasury, where you might have failed to execute contracts, and maybe they've complained about you about failing to deliver on projects. So this one is to check if your business is not, call it blacklisted on Treasury database, to make sure that they only give contracts or tenders to companies that have a good history in delivering products and services to government. So the first question is, which is 4.1, is the bidder or any of its director listed on the National Treasury database of restricted suppliers? So in this case, when we are not, RMK always delivers. And then the next one is the bidder or any of its director listed at the register of tender defaulters in terms of section 29 of prevention and combating corruption activities. We are not listed there. I think it's no, but if it's yes, underneath they want you to provide details. And then on 4.3, they asking you, was the bidder or any of its director convicted by court of law in South Africa for fraud, corruption during the past 5 years? No corruption at RMK, not from the directors or anyone. If ever, you need to provide details. And then, was any contract between the bidder and any organ of state terminated during the past 5 years on account of failure to perform or comply with the contract? We never fail to deliver on the contract. Otherwise, you provide details if you have. And here, I undersign, which is me, the director, a certification that the information that I provided in this is true and correct. Then I sign, then I date it. Then my position is a director in the company. And then the bidder name is RMK. It's not your name, is the company name. LTD. And then that's your SBD 8 completed. Okay, now lastly we're gonna look at the SBD 9, which is the certificate of independent bid determination. Basically, this form is just to make sure that all the necessary steps have been taken to ensure that there's no bid rigging. The first page is just for you to read, understand what the form means, and then to make sure that you understand the content of the form. And here, bid number and description. From our request for quotation, we have the bid number, which is, we call it CAP 1232. And the description is, okay, if you can see here, it's a longish description we'll just put as much as we can to make sure that the bid is identifiable. But normally the bid, they've got short description. So this one is identification. I keep on forgetting, I need to be writing in caps. And recruitment of informal and micro enterprises. Okay, this is now the bid description, and you need to state, to say, in response to the invitation for the bid made by. So this is the institution that made the bid. So we're responding to small enterprise development agency, which is CEDA. And then the next one is, here we certify on behalf of the bidder. The bidder is RMK Industries Pty Ltd. So we certify that on behalf of the bidder that we've read the document, we understand what the documents entails. I'm authorized as a signature, and then whoever signed here, they're the right people who are supposed to sign. And for the purpose of the certificate, we're going to make sure that it's accompanying the bid documents. And then all these are what we're certifying in terms of here, as on behalf of RMK, we're certifying all this, and then we sign. Okay, not we, I sign in terms of me understanding that I'm aware of the conditions, the terms of this bid, and that this document is completed truthfully and is true. So as a signature of the thing, and then I put on the date, and then my position as a director, and then I put the name of the bidder. And these are the main. These are the main forms that you need to complete when you're doing tenders with government. These are the main forms. There will be other forms that, depending on the type of tender that you're bidding for, but the common ones, which are standard, is the SBD 4, is SBD 6.1, is SBD 8, and SBD 9. And then sometimes they put it on SBD 1, the terms of reference. You make sure that you complete all this, and then you also attach the quotation. In this case, they didn't require any additional information in terms of the functionality. Sometimes they'll require reference letters, they might require the accreditations, they might require maybe licenses, they might require a lot of documents. But in this case, what they require are the following documents. Okay, now that we have completed all the SBD forms, now we need to make sure that we submit all the documents that are required to make sure that we qualify to be assessed. The first one will be, they say we need to submit the valid tax clearance. So to double check, we just make sure that it's valid. We know that currently they are not longer using the tax clearance, but they're using the PIN, which the PIN is here. So make sure that the expiry of our tax clearance is in October 2022, and the PIN is here. But don't rely on the tax clearance as it is, because the department, or in this case, CEDA, will use this PIN to check if the company is still in compliance with the tax. So this is the tax clearance. we know it's valid. So we put it there. And the other one is they wanted the CSD form. Here's the summary report of the CSD form. And the most important part that when you're submitting your CSD form is this part here. Your overall tax compliant. Is it compliant? If it's not compliant, you'll not be considered. So your CSD must also be compliant. So it goes hand in hand with the tax clearance. So the CSD form, we make sure that the CSD form is included in the document. And the SBD forms, number 2, they require the SBD forms to be attached. We know we're going to attach them. We completed them. So they are attached. We are happy with that. And then they say failure to submit a valid B certificate will result in points not be allocated. This 20 points for BE not being allocated, but we want those points. So here's our B certificate, which we are a macro enterprise. So it's an exempt. We use the SON affidavit. It's just simple thing. You just download it from the website and you just complete it, and then you just get it stamped at the police station by the commissioner of oath. It doesn't have to always be at the police station, but in this case we use the police station, but you can use the commissioner of oath in terms of exempt micro enterprise. So we're very small. We're not making more than 10 million rand a month per annum, I mean. So we're a very small enterprise. And then if you look at here, we're a level 1, which means just because we are 100% black owned, we get level 1. So it means when they're evaluating the proposals, they will give us the full 20 points. So the battle now will be on the price. We know we have secured the 20 points because we submitted the valid B certificate. And lastly, which is most important, you submit your quotation. You make sure you price it properly. Here's our address in terms of the quotation. We have quotation number, clearly stated that is a quotation. And then here's the address of CEDA or whichever department that you will be requested the quotation. And then we put in the reference number. We've indicated the number of items. We've described what will be provided. Sometimes you might have different services that you will provide. List each and every one, each service, and make sure that you have a unit price for each. How much are you costing it? In this case, we'll say we're going to charge CEDA 2,000 rand per SMME, and then the quantity is 18 SMMEs that they requested us to submit the quotation for. The total is 36,000 rand, and subtotal and the VAT, the total amount that we quoted CEDA for is 41,000. So this is the quote, properly dated with everything, the registration numbers, the VAT registration, contact details, and all that. So this is the quotation. Then we make sure that we submit it. Then we include it in there. And these are the documents that will be submitted with the bid. Make sure that we submit it, and they gave us the address. So in this case, they allow us to email to Mr. Muloto because of the COVID and all that. So they generally accept emailed quotations, but with the tenders, they don't generally accept the email tenders. So they will give you the address and the deadline or the closing date when you need to submit. So we submitted everything that was required. Then we put this in the envelope. If you have to submit it directly, then you write the address as it will be given here, and then you submit it before the closing date. But in this case, we'll just scan this and email it to the address that they requested that to email it to. And then that's your submission for tender. And then you submit, everything is submitted. You just hope for the best. Thank you. That's our lesson on how you complete the tender documents and the forms that you need to complete, and then the documents that you need to submit as required by the terms and conditions of the tender. I thank you.